The sun hung low over Cutter's Ridge like a judge waiting to deliver sentence. Mara Kellen stood at the end of the line, watching. One by one, they were chosen. Sarah Mitchell, blonde, delicate, with hands that had never seen real work, went first. A merchant from Carson City paid her passage fee without haggling, smiled like he'd won something valuable, and led her toward his wagon. Sarah didn't look back. Then Margaret Wells. Then Catherine Dowd. Then the Morrison sisters, both of them, claimed by a rancher who needed help with his 6 children and didn't much care which sister did what. Mara watched them go. She didn't cry, didn't pray, didn't hope. She just stood there, broad-shouldered and silent, her hands rough and scarred from years of work no one wanted to acknowledge. Her dress, the only one she owned that wasn't torn, hung awkwardly on a frame built for labor, not display. She tried to tie her hair back neatly, tried to stand straighter, tried to make herself smaller somehow. It hadn't worked. The remaining men walked the line slowly, assessing. Their eyes passed over her like she was livestock that didn't meet standards. Too tall, too strong, too much. One man paused in front of her. He was older, maybe 50, with thinning hair and the smell of whiskey soaking through his shirt. He looked her up and down with the kind of evaluation that made her skin crawl. "You got childbearing hips," he said, not bothering to lower his voice. "But Jesus, you're built like a goddamn ox. What happened to you?" Mara's jaw tightened. "Hard work. That what you call it?" He laughed, not cruelly, just dismissively. "I need a wife, not a farmhand. Got enough trouble without adding more." He moved on. Another man stopped. Younger this time, maybe 30, with nervous energy and quick eyes that wouldn't quite meet hers. "You cook?" "Yes." "So?" "Well enough." "You got a temper?" Mara hesitated. Honesty or survival? "Sometimes," the man grimaced. "Yeah, I figured. Look, I'm not trying to be unkind, but I need someone who won't. You're just—" He trailed off, searching for words that wouldn't sound as bad as they were. "I need someone softer. You understand?" She understood perfectly. He walked away. The line grew shorter. The sun dropped lower. The crowd began to thin as men made their choices and left. Wagons creaking away into the distance, carrying women toward uncertain futures that were somehow still better than staying behind. By the time the shadows stretched long across the dirt plaza, only 3 women remained. 2 of them were older, widows who'd come west hoping for second chances. One was frail and coughing. The other had a hardness in her eyes that spoke of too many disappointments. And then there was Mara. The auctioneer, a thin man named Horace Webb, who ran the territorial bride service with the efficiency of someone selling cattle, walked over with reluctance written across his face. "Miss Kellen," he said quietly, trying for discretion in a situation that had none. "I'm afraid we may need to, reconsider your options." Meaning the men here today are looking for a certain type of woman, Mara finished. Small, quiet, decorative. Webb winced. "I wouldn't put it quite like that." "How would you put it?" He sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. "Look, you're a capable person, strong, hardworking, but these men, they're looking for companionship, someone to keep house and raise children. They want someone who won't embarrass them," Mara said flatly. "Someone who looks right standing next to them. Someone who makes them feel like men instead of making them wonder if maybe they're not man enough." Webb's silence confirmed it. Mara looked away, jaw clenched so tight it hurt. She would not cry, would not give these people the satisfaction. She'd survived 24 years of being too much and not enough all at once. She'd survive this too. "There's a settlement 3 days south," Webb offered, his voice gentler now. "Smaller, more desperate. They might take whatever they can get," Mara said, "including someone like me." "That's not what I meant." "Yes, it was." A woman's laugh cut through the conversation, sharp and cruel. Mara didn't have to look to know it was Eleanor Price, the boarding house owner who'd made it clear from the moment Mara arrived that she was doing her a favor by allowing her to stay. "Told you she wouldn't get picked," Eleanor said loudly, speaking to her friend but clearly intending for everyone to hear. "Look at her. What man wants to come home to that?" Might as well marry a mule. At least a mule knows its place. The friend, a pinched-faced woman named Ruth, giggled. Maybe she should try the mining camps. I hear those men are desperate enough they'd take anything with a skirt. Anything with a pulse, more like. More laughter. Mara's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her fingernails bit into her palms. She wanted to turn around, wanted to say something devastating, wanted to prove them wrong in some way that would actually matter. But what could she say that would change anything? She was exactly what they said she was. A woman built wrong for the world she lived in. Too strong for femininity, too female for real respect. Caught in a space where she belonged nowhere and fit nothing. Miss Kellen, Webb said quietly, perhaps we should… He stopped. Everyone stopped. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the evening air, not the casual plod of a farm horse, but the deliberate rhythm of something powerful moving with purpose. Mara turned. A man rode into the plaza on a horse that looked like it had been carved from storm clouds. Gray, massive, and barely contained. The rider sat straight-backed and still, dressed in dark clothes worn soft from weather and use. A rifle hung from his saddle. A knife rode at his hip. His face was weathered and scarred, with a jaw that looked like it had been broken and reset badly, and eyes that missed nothing. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Mara. The plaza went silent. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with finality. He was tall, taller than Mara, which was rare, and moved like someone who'd spent his life in places where hesitation got you killed. He walked toward her, not toward Webb, not toward the remaining women, directly toward Mara. Eleanor Price made a small, startled sound. Ruth grabbed her arm. The two widows stepped back nervously. The man stopped 3 feet away. Up close, Mara could see the scar that ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Old, thick, the kind that came from something sharp and meant to kill. His eyes were gray, like his horse, and held the same barely restrained violence. "You Mara Kellen?" His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. "Yes." "You the one nobody wanted?" The cruelty of the question hit like a slap. Mara felt her face burn, felt the shame rise up like bile. But she lifted her chin and met his eyes. "That's right." He nodded once, as if confirming something. Then he turned to Webb. "What's the standard price?" Webb blinked, confused. "I'm sorry?" "For passage and fees, what do you charge?" $50. That covers transport, boarding, and administrative. I'll pay $100. The plaza erupted in whispers. Webb's mouth opened and closed. "Sir, I don't think you understand the situation. Miss Kellen here, she's what?" The man's voice didn't rise, but something in it made Webb take a step back. "Not worth $50? You just said that was the price." "No, I meant she's not what most men are looking for in a… I'm not most men." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and counted out bills with the precision of someone who knew exactly what he had and what it was worth. $100, cash, right now. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. "Wait." The man looked at her. "I don't even know your name," she said. "Elias Vaughn. And you live where?" "Mountains, 2 days north." "Doing what?" "Trapping, some mining, whatever needs doing to stay alive." Mara processed this. A mountain man. A trapper. Someone who lived alone in the kind of wilderness that killed people who didn't know what they were doing. Someone who needed help surviving, not a decorative wife. "Why me?" she asked. Elias looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Because you're strong. Because you can work. Because you won't die the first winter." He paused. "And because nobody else here has the sense to see what that's worth." It wasn't a compliment. It was an assessment. A transaction. But it was honest. And after a lifetime of being lied to, told she was fine the way she was while being rejected for exactly that, honesty felt like something solid to stand on. "What are you expecting?" Mara asked. "From this arrangement?" "Work. Survival. Someone who won't slow me down or get killed doing something stupid." His eyes didn't leave hers. "What are you expecting?" Mara thought about the boarding house, about Eleanor Price's laughter, about another line of men in another desperate town looking at her and finding her lacking, about a future that held nothing but more of the same. Not to starve, she said quietly, not to be thrown away again. Elias nodded. Fair enough. He turned back to Webb and dropped the money on the man's makeshift table. That covers it? Webb looked at the bills like they might bite him. Sir, are you certain you want... I'm certain. But you haven't even spoken with her properly, and the other women... I don't want the other women. I want her. Elias picked up the bills and thrust them at Webb. Take the money or don't, but I'm not standing here all night arguing about it. Webb took the money. Eleanor Price pushed forward, her face flushed with something between outrage and disbelief. Now wait just a minute. You can't just ride in here and... Elias turned to look at her. Just looked. Whatever she saw in his face made her stop mid-sentence. Ma'am, he said quietly, this doesn't concern you. He turned back to Mara. You got belongings? A bag. At the boarding house. Get it. We leave in 10 minutes. He walked back to his horse, the conversation clearly over. Mara stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. This was insane. She didn't know this man, didn't know what his life looked like or what he really wanted or whether she was riding towards something better or something worse. But she knew what staying meant. She knew what the next town would be like, and the one after that, each one filled with men who looked at her and saw something wrong, something broken, something not worth the trouble. At least Elias Vaughn looked at her and saw someone useful. That was something. Miss Kellen, Webb said nervously, you don't have to do this. There are other options. We could... Could what? Mara turned to face him. Send me somewhere else to be humiliated? Tell me to wait for someone desperate enough to overlook what I am? She shook her head. I'm done waiting. She walked toward the boarding house. Behind her, the whispers exploded like a stirred hornet's nest. Did you see that man? He looked half wild. $100 for her. He must be desperate. Or crazy. Living alone up there in the mountains does things to a man. She's going to get herself killed. Better that than what she had here. Mara pushed through the boarding house door. Eleanor was right behind her, sputtering with indignation. You can't possibly be serious about this, Eleanor said. That man is dangerous. Anyone can see that. And you're just going to ride off into the wilderness with him? Alone? Mara grabbed her bag from the corner where she'd left it. Everything she owned fit inside one worn canvas sack. Yes. You'll be dead within a month. Maybe. Mara slung the bag over her shoulder. But at least I won't die listening to you. She walked out. Elias was mounted, waiting. His horse shifted restlessly, eager to move. He didn't offer to help Mara with her bag. Didn't offer to help her mount. Just watched as she tied her belongings behind the saddle of a second horse, a mare, smaller than his but sturdy, and hauled herself up. She sat badly. She'd ridden before, but not often, and not well. Elias noticed, but said nothing. You ready? He asked. No, she wasn't ready. She was terrified. She was making a decision that could get her killed. She was trusting a stranger because she had no better options. But she was also done being invisible. Yes, she said. Elias turned his horse north. Mara followed. Behind them, Cutter's Ridge grew smaller. The plaza, the boarding house, the women who'd been chosen and the men who'd done the choosing, all of it fading into dust and distance. Ahead of them, mountains rose like dark promises against the sky. They rode in silence. Bong. The first hour passed without conversation. Elias led at a steady pace, neither hurried nor slow, following a trail that seemed to exist mostly in his head. Mara focused on staying in the saddle and not falling behind. Her thighs ached. Her back hurt. The mare had a rough gait that jarred her teeth. She didn't complain. The sun set. The temperature dropped. Mara pulled her shawl tighter and kept riding. When full darkness fell, Elias finally stopped at a small clearing near a creek. He dismounted and began unsaddling his horse with efficient practice movements. Mara climbed down more slowly, her legs stiff and uncooperative. She started to unsaddle the mare, fumbling with unfamiliar buckles in the dim light. Not like that, Elias said. You'll hurt her. He showed her once. How to loosen the girth, how to lift the saddle without dragging it across the horse's back, where to check for sores or rubs. You ride much? He asked. Not really. You'll learn. It wasn't encouragement, just fact. He built a fire quickly, using materials that seemed to appear from nowhere. Dry tinder, small sticks, larger wood arranged in a structure that caught and burned clean. Within minutes, flames pushed back the darkness. Mara stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. "You know how to make coffee?" Elias asked. "Yes. Pot's in the left saddlebag. Creek's right there." He nodded toward the sound of running water. "Water needs to be boiled before drinking." Mara found the pot and the coffee grounds. She filled the pot at the creek, set it near the fire, and waited for it to boil, watching Elias from the corner of her eye. He moved with a kind of economy that spoke of long practice, no wasted motion, no hesitation. He laid out bedrolls, checked his rifle, cut strips of dried meat and hard bread for their meal. When the coffee was ready, Mara poured 2 cups. Elias took his without comment and sat down near the fire, chewing his food slowly. Mara sat across from him and did the same. The silence stretched. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked. Elias looked at her over the rim of his cup. "Told you already. You told me I was strong and could work. But there are plenty of strong women who can work, women who would have been chosen by other men. Not like you. What does that mean?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. Most women who come out here, they're looking for something better than what they left. That's fine. Nothing wrong with hope. But hope doesn't keep you alive when winter hits and your food runs out and the nearest help is 3 days away. He took another sip of coffee. You weren't standing in that line hoping for something better. You were standing there expecting to be passed over again. That's different. Mara felt something twist in her chest. "That's why you wanted me? Because I expect the worst?" "Because you survive it anyway." The words hung between them. "You don't know that," Mara said quietly. "Yeah, I do." Elias gestured at her hands, rough, scarred, capable. "You don't get hands like that from giving up. You get them from doing whatever needs doing, whether you want to or not." He paused. "That's what it takes up here. Not optimism, not hope. Just the ability to keep going when everything's telling you to quit." Mara looked down at her hands. She'd always hated them. Too big, too rough. Proof that she'd failed at being the kind of woman she was supposed to be. But maybe they were proof of something else too. "What happens when we get where we're going?" she asked. "You work. I work. We survive. That's it? That's everything." Elias finished his coffee and set the cup aside. "I'm not looking for romance, not looking for someone to keep me company or make me feel less alone. I'm looking for a partner who can pull her weight and won't get killed doing it. And if I can't?" His eyes met hers, hard and honest. "Then you'll die. And I'll bury you. And I'll find someone else." It should have been cruel. Should have felt like a threat. Instead, it felt like respect. No false promises, no pretty lies. Just the truth, laid out clean. Mara could work with truth. "Fair enough," she said. Elias nodded once, then stood and walked to his bedroll. "We leave at first light. Get some sleep." He lay down, turned his back to the fire, and within minutes, his breathing had evened out into something that might have been sleep, or might have been the alert rest of someone who'd learned to sleep light in dangerous places. Mara sat by the fire a while longer, watching the flames and thinking about the choice she'd made. She'd traded one uncertainty for another, left behind humiliation for potential death, chosen a stranger over slow starvation of the soul. It might be the stupidest decision she'd ever made, or it might be the first real choice she'd ever had the courage to take. Time would tell. She finished her coffee, checked that the horses were secure, and lay down on her own bedroll. Above her, stars burned cold and distant. Tomorrow, she'd start learning how to survive. Tonight, she'd sleep. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Mara Kellen felt something that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't despair either. She felt possibility. Morning came hard and early. Mara woke to the sound of Elias moving around camp, already dressed and working. The fire had been rebuilt, coffee was brewing, the horses were saddled. She sat up, disoriented and sore. "How long have you been awake?" she asked. "Hour, maybe." "You should have woken me. I could have helped." "You needed sleep more than I needed help." He handed her a cup of coffee. "Drink. We've got a long ride today." They ate quickly. More dried meat, some hard biscuits that tasted like sawdust but filled the stomach. Mara forced it down and tried not to think about real food. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, they were riding. The landscape changed as they traveled north. The flat, dusty plains gave way to rolling hills covered in scrub brush and scattered pines. The air grew cooler. The horizon lifted, dominated by mountains that seemed to grow larger with every mile. Mara's body screamed in protest. Every muscle hurt. Her back ached. Her thighs felt like raw meat where they rubbed against the saddle. She didn't complain. Around midday, they stopped briefly to water the horses and stretch. Elias looked at her critically. "You're hurting." "I'm fine." "No, you're not. But you're not whining about it, which is better than fine." He pulled a small tin from his saddlebag and tossed it to her. "Salve. Use it tonight on anywhere that's rubbing raw. Otherwise, you won't be able to ride tomorrow." Mara caught the tin, surprised. It was a small kindness. Practical, not sentimental, but still more than she'd expected. "Thank you." Elias just nodded and mounted up again. They continued. The trail grew steeper, the trees grew thicker, and slowly, gradually, civilization fell away behind them. No more farms, no more fences, no more signs of human presence, just wilderness, raw and indifferent. As the sun began its descent toward the peaks ahead, Mara saw their destination for the first time. A cabin, small and solid, built into the side of a mountain slope. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. A lean-to stable stood nearby, sturdy but worn. A small cleared area showed signs of a garden, though nothing was growing this late in the season. It looked lonely. It looked hard. It looked like exactly the kind of place where people went to disappear. Elias rode straight to the stable and dismounted. Mara followed suit, her legs nearly buckling when her feet hit the ground. "Get your bag," Elias said. "Put it inside, then come help me with the horses." Mara grabbed her belongings and walked to the cabin. The door wasn't locked. Inside was spare and clean, a single room divided by function rather than walls. A bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove, shelves holding supplies, hooks for clothing. Everything necessary, nothing extra. Mara set her bag down near the bed and paused, suddenly aware of what that meant. One bed, one room. She walked back outside, her heart beating faster. Elias was brushing down his horse, working with the same methodical care he applied to everything. "There's only one bed," Mara said. "Yeah." You thought what?" He didn't stop working. "That I'd sleep outside, give you the bed while I freeze on the floor?" He glanced at her. "We're both adults. We both need sleep. The bed's big enough for 2 people who aren't trying to do anything but sleep." But if you're worried I'm going to force myself on you, don't be. I'm not interested and I'm too tired at the end of most days to care." He moved to the mare and began brushing her down. "If that changes for either of us, we'll talk about it like adults. Until then, we share the bed and we keep our hands to ourselves. Clear?" It was blunt, uncomfortable, completely lacking in romance or delicacy. It was also perfectly clear. "Clear," Mara said. "Good. Now help me finish with the horses, then I'll show you where things are." They worked together in silence, Mara following Elias's instructions on how to properly care for the animals. Feed, water, check for injuries, brush until the coats were clean and the horses settled. By the time they finished, the sun had set and the temperature had dropped sharply. Inside the cabin, Elias lit lamps and built up the fire in the stove. "Hungry?" he asked. "Yes." He pulled out supplies, flour, salt, lard, a few potatoes, some dried venison. "Can you make biscuits?" "Yes." "Make enough for tonight and tomorrow morning. I'll fry the meat and potatoes." They worked side by side in the small kitchen area, not talking, just moving around each other with careful awareness. Mara made the biscuits, her hands falling into familiar rhythms. Elias cooked the meat and potatoes with the same efficiency he brought to everything else. When the food was ready, they sat at the table and ate. It was good, simple, but good. The kind of food that filled your stomach and gave you energy for the next day's work. After dinner, Mara cleaned the dishes while Elias checked his traps and equipment for the next day. When everything was put away, they stood awkwardly in the small space, both aware that bedtime was approaching and neither quite sure how to navigate it. Finally, Elias just pulled off his boots and outer shirt, leaving his undershirt and pants on, and climbed into bed on the side nearest the wall. He turned his back to the room and closed his eyes. Mara stood there a moment longer, then did the same. removing her boots and outer layer, keeping everything else on, climbing carefully into the other side of the bed. The mattress was corn husk and straw, lumpy but warm. A heavy quilt covered them both. The cabin was cold enough that body heat mattered. Mara lay rigid, hyper-aware of the man beside her, the narrow space between them, the strangeness of sharing a bed with someone she barely knew. "Relax," Elias said without opening his eyes. "You're making the whole bed tense." "Sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just breathe and go to sleep." Mara tried. Slowly, gradually, exhaustion won out over anxiety. Her muscles unclenched, her breathing deepened, and for the first time in her life, Mara Kellen fell asleep next to a man who had chosen her, not in spite of what she was, but because of it. It wasn't love. It wasn't even affection, but it was something, and for now, that was enough. Mara woke to darkness and the sound of movement. Her eyes snapped open, disoriented. The cabin was still black, no hint of dawn through the single window. Beside her, the bed was empty, the blankets already cold where Elias had been. She sat up, her body protesting. Every muscle screamed. Her thighs were raw. Her shoulders felt like someone had beaten them with a club. Across the room, Elias was pulling on his boots, already dressed. A lamp burned low on the table. "What time is it?" Mara's voice came out rough. 4. "In the morning?" "That's when 4 happens, yeah." He stood and reached for his coat. "There's oats in the jar on the second shelf. Make breakfast. I'll be back in an hour." "Where are you going?" "Check the trap line." He slung his rifle over his shoulder. "Fire needs wood. There's an axe by the door and a pile that needs splitting. If you don't know how, figure it out." He walked out, letting in a blast of cold air before the door shut behind him. Mara sat in the darkness, alone in a strange place, her body hurting and her mind racing. This was her life now. She threw off the blankets and stood. The floor was freezing beneath her bare feet. She dressed quickly, layering what little she had against the cold, then lit another lamp and surveyed the cabin properly for the first time. Everything had its place. Supplies were organized with military precision. Tools hung on pegs, each one clean and maintained. The floor was swept. The stove was clean. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was decorative. It was the home of someone who understood that survival didn't care about comfort. Mara found the oats and set water to boil. While it heated, she went outside. The cold hit like a physical force. Her breath came out in clouds. The sky was still dark, but a gray line touched the eastern horizon, promising dawn eventually. The woodpile sat beside the cabin, rounds of pine and fir waiting to be split. The axe was exactly where Elias said it would be, its blade sharp and clean. Mara picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. She'd split wood before, years ago, when her father was still alive and she was strong enough to help. But that was a long time ago, and her memory of the technique was fuzzy. She set around on the chopping block, raised the axe, and swung. The blade bit into the wood and stuck. She hadn't hit the center. The round tilted but didn't split. She pulled the axe free and tried again, and again. On the 4th try, the wood finally cracked apart. Mara's arms burned. Sweat ran down her back despite the cold. She set up another round and kept going. By the time Elias returned, she had a decent pile of split wood, and her hands were covered in blisters. He looked at the pile, then at her, taking in the sweat and the way she was trying not to wince. "You're doing it wrong," he said. "It's split, isn't it?" "Barely. You're fighting the wood instead of letting the axe do the work." He took the tool from her hands and set up a round. "Watch." He raised the axe, not as high as she'd been swinging it, and brought it down in a smooth arc that looked almost lazy. The wood split cleanly in one strike. "You're trying to muscle it," he said. "That'll wear you out in 10 minutes. It's about momentum and placement. Hit the cracks. Let gravity help." He handed the axe back. "Try again." Mara set up another round. She tried to mimic what she'd seen. Less force, more control. The axe came down cleaner. The wood split. "Better," Elias said. "Keep going. We need enough for 3 days." He walked into the cabin. Mara kept splitting wood until her arms shook and her blisters bled. When she finally stopped, the pile was 3 times larger and the sun had fully risen. Inside, Elias had made coffee and was eating oats directly from the pot. "Breakfast is cold," he said. "Sorry. Don't apologize, just eat and then we've got work to do." The oats were bland and thick, but they filled her stomach. Mara ate standing up, too tired to sit. "Your hands," Elias said. She looked down. Blood seeped through the broken blisters. "They'll toughen," she said, "not if they get infected." He pulled out a small kit and gestured for her to sit. "Let me see." Mara held out her hands. Elias examined them with the same clinical efficiency he brought to everything, then cleaned the worst of the blisters with something that burned and wrapped them in clean cloth. "Keep them dry today," he said. "Tomorrow they'll hurt worse. Day after that, they'll start to callous." "What am I doing today?" "Learning the land." He stood and grabbed his rifle. "Get your coat. We're walking the property line." They spent the next 6 hours hiking through wilderness that seemed determined to kill anything soft or unprepared. Elias moved through it like he was part of it, stepping over roots Mara didn't see, avoiding mud she walked straight into, reading the land like a language she'd never learned. He showed her the creek where they got water, the places where game trails crossed, the trees that marked the boundaries of what he considered his territory, the spots where predators denned and needed to be avoided. "Bear sign," he said, pointing to claw marks on a tree trunk. "Fresh, maybe 2 days old. Don't go near this area alone." "What if I have to?" "Then you bring the rifle and you make noise. Bears mostly want to avoid you, but if you surprise one, especially a mother with cubs, she won't hesitate." He looked at her. "You ever shoot?" "A little. My father taught me." "Taught you what? How to aim or how to kill?" Mara thought about the handful of times she'd fired her father's old rifle at targets set up behind their house. "How to aim, I guess. Not the same thing." Elias unslung his rifle and handed it to her. "See that dead tree? About 40 yards out, the one with the broken top?" Mara found it. "Aim for the center of the trunk." She settled the rifle against her shoulder, sighted down the barrel, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil kicked harder than she remembered. The shot went wide, missing the tree entirely. "You're flinching," Elias said, anticipating the kick. "Don't. Breathe out slow and squeeze like you're surprising yourself." She tried again. This time she hit the tree, but low and to the left. Better. Again. They spent an hour on shooting. By the end, Mara could hit the tree consistently, though not always where she aimed. Her shoulder was bruised and her ears rang. "It'll do," Elias said, taking the rifle back. "But you need to understand something. Shooting at a tree is easy. Shooting at something that's trying to kill you is different. You hesitate, you die. You miss, you die. You freeze, you die. So if you're going to pull the trigger, you better mean it." "I understand." "No, you don't. Not yet." He started walking again. "But you will." They returned to the cabin as the sun began its descent. Mara's legs were rubber. Her feet screamed inside her boots. The wrappings on her hands were soaked with sweat and blood. Elias went to check his traps while Mara started dinner with what she found in the cabin. More venison, some wild onions, a few carrots that were starting to go soft. She made a stew, thick and simple, and set it to simmer. When Elias returned, he was carrying 2 rabbits, already gutted and cleaned. "You know how to skin?" he asked. "No?" "Come here." He showed her how to make the cuts, where to peel the hide, how to avoid tainting the meat with the organs. His hands moved with practiced ease, teaching without judgment or impatience. Mara watched closely, trying to memorize every step. "Tomorrow you'll do it," he said. "Tonight, watch." They ate the stew in silence. It wasn't good. Mara had overcooked the meat and undersalted everything, but Elias ate it without complaint. After dinner, they worked side by side cleaning equipment and preparing for the next day. The routine was starting to form. Wake, work, eat, sleep. Over and over. No breaks, no rest, just survival. As they settled into bed that night, Mara's body hurt so badly she wanted to cry. She didn't. She just lay there, breathing through the pain, willing sleep to come. "You did all right today," Elias said into the darkness. It was the first compliment he'd given, small, grudging, but real. "Thank you," Mara whispered. He didn't respond, already asleep or pretending to be, but the words settled into Mara's chest like something warm. The days blurred together after that. Wake before dawn. Split wood. Make breakfast. Work. The work changed but never stopped. Some days they checked trap lines, pulling frozen rabbits and the occasional fox from steel jaws. Other days they hauled water from the creek, breaking ice to get to the floe beneath. They repaired sections of the cabin where wind had torn away chinking. They hunted, though Mara was still too unreliable a shot to be trusted with anything important. Elias taught her constantly, but never gently. He showed her how to set snares, how to read tracks in the snow, how to dig a winter cache that animals couldn't get into. When she failed, and she failed often, he didn't coddle her. Wrong, he'd say. Do it again. Or, you're thinking too much. Just do it. Or simply, no. It was brutal, exhausting, nothing like the life Mara had imagined when she'd climbed onto that horse in Cutter's Ridge. But she didn't quit. Her hands toughened into leather. The blisters became calluses. Her muscles stopped screaming and started remembering. She learned to read Elias's silences, to understand when he wanted help and when he wanted to be left alone. They didn't talk much. Elias wasn't a talker. Some days they'd go from dawn to dusk with nothing but functional communication. Hand me that knife. Water's low. Check the horses. But sometimes, in the evenings after the work was done, Elias would say something that wasn't an order or an instruction. Just a thought, dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. One night, 3 weeks after Mara arrived, they were sitting by the fire after dinner. Elias was oiling his rifle. Mara was mending a tear in her only spare shirt. You ever wonder why people stay in towns? He asked. Mara looked up, surprised. What? Towns, cities, places packed full of people. You ever wonder why they do it? She thought about Cutter's Ridge, about the boarding house, and Eleanor Price's cruel laughter, about standing in line while men assessed her like livestock. Safety, I guess, she said. Easier to survive when you're not alone. Maybe. Elias ran the oiled cloth along the rifle barrel. Or maybe it's just fear. Easier to be miserable with other people than brave by yourself. You think everyone in towns is miserable? Not everyone, but a lot of them. He looked at her. You were. It wasn't a question. Mara set down her mending. Yes. Why'd you stay so long? Where else was I supposed to go? Anywhere. Nowhere. Does it matter? He went back to cleaning the rifle. You were dying there. Slowly maybe, but dying. Anyone could see it. Not everyone can just leave, Mara said, hearing the defensive edge in her voice. Some of us don't have choices. Everyone has choices. Most people just don't like any of them. That's easy to say when you're strong enough to survive alone. Elias looked at her again, and something in his expression was almost gentle. You think I was always strong? I was a kid once, weak, scared, completely unprepared for what the world was going to do to me. He set the rifle aside. Strength isn't something you're born with. It's something you build because the alternative is dying. Mara wanted to ask what had happened to him. What had driven him to the mountains? Why a man who clearly knew how to survive around people chose not to. But before she could find the words, Elias stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkness. Storm coming, he said. Big one. Day after tomorrow, maybe. The conversation was over. 2 days later, the storm hit. Mara woke to wind that sounded like the cabin was being torn apart. Snow drove sideways past the window in sheets so thick she couldn't see the stable 20 yards away. Stay inside, Elias said, already dressed. I need to check the horses. I'll come with you. No, you'll get lost between here and there, and I'll have to find you. I'm not helpless. Didn't say you were. But you don't know this land in a whiteout, and I do. He pulled on his heaviest coat. Stay. Inside. He went out into the storm. Mara stood at the window, watching his shape disappear almost immediately into the white chaos. Her stomach twisted with anxiety. What if he got hurt? What if he didn't come back? She forced herself to move, built up the fire, made coffee, checked their food supplies, kept busy. 20 minutes passed, then 30. At 45 minutes, Mara was reaching for her coat when the door slammed open and Elias stumbled inside, covered in snow, half dragging something behind him. Not something. Someone. Help me, Elias grunted. Mara rushed over. Together they pulled the figure inside and shut the door against the wind. It was a man, young, maybe 20, wearing city clothes completely inadequate for the weather. His lips were blue. He was shaking so violently his teeth clacked together. Found him wandering near the creek, Elias said, already stripping off the man's frozen jacket. Get blankets. Hot water. Move. Mara moved. They stripped the stranger down to his underclothes and wrapped him in every blanket they had. Mara heated water and made him drink it in small sips while Elias checked for frostbite. Fingers and toes might make it, Elias muttered. Ears are questionable. The young man's shaking gradually subsided. Color started returning to his face. His eyes, when they finally focused, were brown and frightened. "Where am I?" he whispered. "My cabin," Elias said. 2 days north of Cutter's Ridge. "What the hell were you doing out there?" I got lost. I was looking for—" He trailed off, his eyes darting between Elias and Mara. "There's supposed to be silver in these mountains. Everyone says so." Elias's expression went cold. Everyone says a lot of things. Most of them are lies. But the assayer in Miller's Creek said, "I don't care what some assayer said. There's no silver here, just rock and trees and things that'll kill you if you're stupid enough to go looking for something that doesn't exist." The young man's face crumpled. "But I spent everything I had on equipment. Came all the way from Philadelphia. It has to be here." "It's not. You're lying. You're probably sitting on a fortune and you just don't want anyone to know." Elias stood up slowly. His voice went very quiet. "Boy, I just saved your life. You want to accuse me of lying? You do it outside. See how long you last." The young man paled and shut his mouth. Mara stepped in. "What's your name?" "Thomas. Thomas Brennan." "Well, Thomas, you're lucky to be alive. Another hour and you'd have frozen to death." She refilled his water cup. "You have supplies? A camp?" "Had a camp. About a mile east, I think. But the storm hit and I couldn't find my way back and—" He looked down at his bandaged hands. "I thought I was going to die." "You almost did," Elias said flatly. He looked at Mara. "He stays until the storm breaks. Then he leaves." "Where's he supposed to go?" Mara asked. "Not my problem." "Elias, no." He grabbed his coat. "I'm going back to check the horses. He's your responsibility." He went back out into the storm, leaving Mara alone with the stranger. Thomas looked at her with something like hope. "Is he always like that?" "Yes." "You're married to him?" "Something like that." Thomas absorbed this. "He doesn't seem— you seem too kind for someone like him." Mara poured herself coffee, considering her response. "He's not kind, but he's honest. And up here, that matters more." They sat in uncomfortable silence while the storm raged outside. Thomas dozed fitfully. Mara kept the fire going and watched the window for any sign of Elias. When he finally returned, snow-covered and grim, he moved straight to the stove without acknowledging either of them. That night, Thomas slept by the fire while Mara and Elias shared the bed as usual. But something had changed. There was a tension in the cabin that hadn't been there before. As they lay in the darkness, Mara whispered, "Why are you so angry about the silver story?" Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Because that story is going to get people killed," he finally said. "And when people come looking for silver that doesn't exist, they don't just die quietly. They get desperate. Desperate people do desperate things." "You think more will come?" "I know they will. Thomas is just the first." "What do we do?" "We survive. Same as always." He rolled over, ending the conversation. But Mara lay awake long after, listening to the storm and thinking about what it meant that the outside world had found them. The storm lasted 3 days. By the time it broke, they were nearly out of firewood, and tensions were running high. Thomas had recovered enough to be restless, pacing the small cabin and asking endless questions about the mountains, the land, possible mineral deposits. Elias ignored him completely. On the morning of the 4th day, the sun broke through and Elias told Thomas to get ready to leave. "I don't have any supplies," Thomas protested. "My camp is buried. My equipment is gone." "That's your problem." "I'll die out there." "Probably, but you'll die faster if you stay here." Elias packed a small bundle, some dried meat, a blanket, a flint. "This'll get you back to Miller's Creek if you're smart about it. Follow the creek south. Don't leave the water. Don't try to take shortcuts." "This is insane. You can't just send me out there to die." "I'm giving you the same chance I'd give anyone. What you do with it is up to you." Thomas looked at Mara desperately. Please, you seem like a decent person. Don't let him do this. Mara thought about stepping in, about arguing for mercy, about being the kind person Thomas thought she was. But she looked at their supplies, already running lower than they should be, looked at Elias's face, hard and immovable, looked at the mountains outside, beautiful and deadly. You should go, she said quietly, while the weather's clear. Thomas stared at her like she'd betrayed him. Maybe she had, but survival didn't care about guilt. Elias led him outside, gave him brief directions, and watched him stumble off into the snow. When he came back inside, Mara was washing dishes with more force than necessary. You think I'm cruel, Elias said. I think you're practical. That's not an answer. Mara turned to face him. What was I supposed to say? Stay? Use up our food and our space and our resources on someone who came here chasing a fantasy? You could have. And you would have let me? Elias was quiet. No. Then it doesn't matter what I think, does it? It matters. He sat down at the table. You're going to have to make harder choices than that before winter's over. I need to know if you can. Mara dried her hands and sat across from him. What are you really asking me? If someone shows up here, and more will show up, and they're hurt, or dying, or desperate, are you going to let compassion get us both killed? Is that what you think compassion does? Kills people? Up here? Yes. He leaned forward. I'm not saying don't care. Care all you want. But caring doesn't change the math. We have X amount of food, X amount of wood, X amount of supplies. Everything we give away is something we don't have when we need it. So we just let people die? We let them make their own choices. Thomas chose to come here, chose to believe a story about silver, chose to be unprepared. Those were his decisions. Elias's eyes were hard. I'm not responsible for saving him from himself. Mara wanted to argue, wanted to say that people deserved help, that mercy mattered, that being human meant caring about whether strangers lived or died. But she thought about Thomas's entitled confusion, his assumption that someone else would solve his problems, his complete lack of preparation for the reality he'd walked into. And she thought about the fact that helping him would have meant less food for her and Elias, would have meant risk, would have meant choosing his life over theirs. I understand, she said, finally. Do you? I don't like it, but I understand it. Elias nodded slowly. That's enough. The rest of the day passed in quiet work. They dug out from the storm, cleared snow from the roof, checked the trap line. Everything was harder after 3 days of being confined. The snow was deeper, the cold more biting. That night, as they prepared for bed, Elias said something unexpected. You did good these past few days, keeping the fire going, rationing the food, not panicking. Mara paused in braiding her hair. Thank you. I'm not trying to make you hard, he said. I'm trying to keep you alive. I know. Do you? She looked at him, this scarred, difficult man who'd chosen her when no one else would, who taught her without softness but also without cruelty, who demanded she be strong because the alternative was death. Yes, she said. I know. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. Good, he said, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Mara felt like maybe she was becoming the kind of person who could survive this, not because she was perfect, but because she was willing to do what it took, even when it hurt. 2 weeks after Thomas Brennan stumbled away into the snow, the first real cold arrived. It wasn't the sharp, biting cold they'd been living with. This was something deeper, something that settled into your bones and refused to leave. The kind of cold that made breathing painful and turned exposed skin gray in minutes. Mara woke one morning to find frost on the inside of the cabin walls. We're burning through wood too fast, Elias said, studying their depleted pile. His breath came out in visible clouds even inside. Need to cut more before the next storm hits. When's that? He looked at the sky through the window. Tomorrow. Maybe tonight. They spent the day in the forest, Elias felling trees while Mara limbed the branches and cut them into manageable lengths. Her axe work had improved, but it was still slow, inefficient. For every tree Elias dropped, she barely finished processing the last one. You're gripping too tight, he said, not looking up from his work. wasting energy. Mara adjusted her grip and kept swinging. Her shoulders burned, her hands were numb inside her gloves. But she didn't stop. By late afternoon, they'd hauled 3 loads back to the cabin. It wasn't enough, wouldn't be enough, but it was what they could manage before darkness fell. That night, the temperature dropped so low the water bucket froze solid inside the cabin. Elias built the fire higher than usual, feeding it constantly through the night. They slept in all their clothes, huddled under every blanket they owned, and still Mara's teeth chattered. "This is normal?" she asked into the darkness. "This is early winter," Elias said. "It gets worse." Mara tried to imagine worse and couldn't. The storm Elias predicted hit just before dawn. Not snow this time, but ice. It coated everything in a crystalline shell that made the world look beautiful and deadly. They couldn't work outside. The footing was too treacherous, the visibility too poor. So they stayed in, doing the small tasks that kept them alive. Mara mended clothes, Elias maintained equipment. They rationed food carefully, eating less than their bodies wanted because the supplies had to last. On the 3rd day of being trapped inside, Mara made a mistake. She was reaching for the coffee tin on the high shelf when her foot slipped on a patch of ice melt near the stove. She fell hard, her hand catching the edge of the shelf and sending the tin crashing down. Coffee grounds exploded across the floor. For a moment, she just sat there, staring at the mess. Their coffee, weeks' worth, scattered and ruined. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean—" "Stop!" Elias's voice was sharp. He knelt beside her, checking her hand where blood was already welling from a cut. "Are you hurt?" "It's nothing." "I asked if you're hurt." "My hand, but it's fine. The coffee, Elias, I wasted—" "It's coffee." He pulled her to her feet and led her to the table. "Sit." He cleaned and bandaged her hand with the same efficient care he always showed, his movements precise despite the tension in his jaw. "I can save some of it," Mara said desperately, looking at the scattered grounds. "If I'm careful, I can—" "Leave it." "But, Mara, leave it." He met her eyes. "Accidents happen. You didn't do it on purpose. Beating yourself up about it doesn't put the coffee back in the tin. We needed that. We need a lot of things. We'll manage without." He finished tying off the bandage. "You want to help? Sweep it up and stop apologizing." Mara grabbed the broom with shaking hands and cleaned up the mess, salvaging what little she could into a small jar. It wasn't much. Maybe enough for a week if they were careful. That evening, as they ate a thin soup made from the last of their vegetables and some old jerky, Elias spoke without looking up from his bowl. "My first winter up here, I lost half my supplies to a bear that broke into my cache, tore through everything, ruined most of what it didn't eat." He took another bite. "Spent 2 months living on pine needle tea and whatever I could trap. Lost 30 pounds. Nearly died." Mara waited. "Point is," Elias continued, "you can prepare all you want. Do everything right, and something will still go wrong. Bear, storm, sickness, accident. The mountain doesn't care how careful you are. So what do? Adapt, survive. Stop wasting energy on guilt." He looked at her then. "You made a mistake. It cost us coffee. We'll live. Save the guilt for when it's something that actually matters." It was the closest thing to comfort Mara had heard from him. Rough and practical, but real. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded and went back to his soup. The ice storm broke the next day, but the cold stayed. And with the cold came hunger. Not the kind that made your stomach growl, but the deeper kind that made your body burn through everything it had just trying to stay warm. The trap lines produced less. Animals were scarce, either dead or denned up for winter. What they did catch was lean, offering little fat to supplement their dwindling supplies. Elias began hunting farther from the cabin, sometimes leaving before dawn and not returning until after dark. Mara stayed behind, maintaining the fire, checking the nearby snares, doing what work she could alone. It was during one of these solo days that she heard the horses. At first she thought she'd imagined it, but no, there it was again. The unmistakable sound of hooves and voices carrying through the frozen air. Mara grabbed the rifle and moved to the window. 3 men rode into the clearing, leading 2 pack horses loaded with equipment. They weren't dressed like Thomas had been. These men had proper winter gear, good horses, expensive rifles. They looked competent. That made them more dangerous. Mara's heart hammered as she watched them approach. Elias had been explicit in his instructions about what to do if strangers showed up while he was gone. Stay inside. Don't engage. If they try to force entry, shoot through the door. The men dismounted, and one of them, tall, well-built, with a thick beard and confident movements, walked toward the cabin. "Hello in there," he called out, his voice friendly but carrying. "We're just passing through, looking for shelter and maybe some information." Mara didn't answer. "My name's Marcus Webb. I've got 2 men with me. We mean no harm, just hoping to talk for a minute." Still Mara stayed silent, the rifle heavy in her hands. Marcus stepped closer. "Look, I understand the caution. These are hard mountains, but we're not here to cause trouble. We're looking for a man named Elias Vaughn. You know him?" Mara's blood went cold. "We heard he's been up here a long time," Marcus continued. "Knows the land. We're willing to pay for information about mineral deposits in the area. Good money." So it was starting, just like Elias had predicted. "There's no silver," Mara called out, keeping her voice steady. "Whatever you heard, it's wrong." "That's so?" Marcus sounded amused. "Then why are people like Vaughn staying up here? Man doesn't live in this kind of isolation unless there's a reason. His reason is he wants to be left alone." "Can I speak with him about that, man to man?" "He's not here." "When will he be back?" "Don't know." There was a pause. Then Marcus said, his voice still pleasant, but with an edge now, "Look, miss, we've come a long way. We're not leaving without at least talking to Vaughn. We can wait if we need to." "You'll freeze waiting. We've got supplies, and there's a nice covered area by your stable that would work just fine for camping." It was a threat dressed as politeness. They were staying whether she liked it or not. Mara thought fast. If she let them camp here, they'd be waiting when Elias returned. He'd walk right into them. But if she tried to force them to leave, they might decide to come inside anyway. 3 armed men against 1 woman with a rifle she barely knew how to use. "You can water your horses," she said finally. "Then you need to move on. That's not very hospitable. This isn't a hotel." One of the other men, younger, with nervous energy, spoke up. "Marcus, maybe we should just—" "We're staying," Marcus cut him off. He turned back to the cabin. "We'll be respectful, keep to ourselves, but we're not leaving until we talk to Vaughn." Mara's hands tightened on the rifle. She was out of options, and they all knew it. She watched through the window as the men made camp near the stable, efficient and organized. They had good equipment, good supplies. They'd clearly done this before. As the sun began to set, Mara's anxiety grew. Elias would be back soon. He'd see their horses, their camp. He'd walk into a situation he wasn't prepared for, unless she warned him. She made a decision. Moving quickly, she pulled on her heaviest clothes, grabbed the rifle, and slipped out the back of the cabin where the men couldn't see. The cold hit her like a fist, but she pushed through it, moving into the trees using the route Elias had shown her weeks ago. She had to intercept him before he reached the clearing. The forest was deadly quiet, the kind of silence that came with extreme cold. Mara's breath froze on her scarf. Her fingers went numb even inside her gloves. But she kept moving, following the trail Elias always used when returning from his northern hunts. She'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes when she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. A low, huffing grunt. Then another. Mara stopped, her heart hammering. She knew that sound. Elias had made her memorize it. Bear. She turned slowly, searching the darkening forest. There, about 30 yards away. A massive shape moving through the trees with deceptive speed. It hadn't seen her yet. Or maybe it had and didn't care. Bears in winter were desperate, hungry, unpredictable. Mara remembered Elias's instructions. Make noise. Make yourself big. Back away slowly. She raised her arms and shouted, "Hey, get out of here!" The bear stopped, turned its massive head toward her, and charged. There was no thought, no decision, just instinct and terror. Mara raised the rifle and fired. The shot went wild, cracking through the frozen air. The bear didn't stop. She fired again. This time she hit something. The bear stumbled, roared, but kept coming. Mara turned and ran. She knew it was the wrong thing to do. Knew you weren't supposed to run from a bear. But every human instinct screamed at her to move, to get away, to survive. She made it maybe 10 yards before something massive hit her from behind. The impact drove the air from her lungs. She hit the ground hard, the rifle flying from her hands. Claws raked across her back. Weight crushed her into the snow. The bear was on top of her, roaring, its breath hot and rank. Mara screamed. Then a shot rang out. Different from hers, closer, more confident. The weight on her back shifted. Another shot. Another. The bear roared again, this time in pain, and the crushing weight lifted. Mara lay face down in the snow, gasping, unable to move. "Mara!" Elias's voice, sharp with fear, an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "Don't move. Stay down." She heard him moving around her, heard another shot, then silence. Then he was beside her, rolling her over gently, his hands checking for injuries. "Where are you hurt?" His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Mara, where did it get you?" "My back," she managed. "It hit my back." He turned her carefully, his hands moving over her coat. She felt him probe the tears in the fabric, felt the sting of cold air on exposed skin. "You're bleeding, but it's not deep," he said, his voice tight. "The coat took most of it. Can you stand?" "I think so." He helped her to her feet. Her legs shook, but held. A few yards away, the bear lay in the snow, massive and still, blood pooling beneath it. "You shot it," Elias said. "Twice. Neither was a killing shot, but you slowed it down enough for me to finish it." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "That was either very brave or very stupid." "I was trying to find you," Mara said, her teeth chattering. "There are men at the cabin. 3 of them, looking for you." Elias's expression went hard. "Who?" "Marcus Webb. He said he wants information about mineral deposits. Said he's willing to wait." "How long have they been there?" "Since afternoon." Elias cursed under his breath. He retrieved Mara's rifle from where it had fallen, checked it, and handed it back to her. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Then we need to move, now, before they get curious about the gunshots." They started back toward the cabin, Elias setting a brutal pace despite Mara's injuries. As they walked, he spoke in short, clipped sentences. "Marcus Webb is a land speculator. He buys up mineral rights, sells them to mining companies. If he's here, it means the silver rumor is spreading faster than I thought." "What do we do?" "We find out what he knows and what he wants. Then we make him leave." "How?" Elias didn't answer, but his hand rested on his rifle in a way that made his intentions clear. They approached the cabin from the east, staying in the trees until they could see the camp. The 3 men had a fire going and were cooking something that sent meat smell into the cold air. "Stay behind me," Elias said quietly. "If shooting starts, get to the cabin and bar the door." Elias, not a debate. He stepped out of the trees, his rifle held casually but ready. "Marcus Webb." "Been a while." The 3 men jumped to their feet, hands moving toward weapons before Marcus recognized who was speaking. "Elias Vaughn, heard you were still alive." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Surprised to find you've got company, though. That your woman who was so reluctant to talk earlier." "That's right." "She said you weren't here." "She lied." Elias moved closer, positioning himself between the men in the cabin. "What do you want, Marcus?" "Same thing I've always wanted. Opportunity. I heard there's silver in these mountains." "There isn't." "That's what everyone says, right up until someone finds it." "I've been here 6 years, covered every inch of this territory. There's no silver." Marcus studied him. "You know, that's almost exactly what I'd say if I'd found something and wanted to keep it for myself. Believe what you want. Doesn't make it true." "Then you won't mind if we look around a bit." "I mind. This is my land." "Is it? You got papers that say so?" The tension ratcheted higher. Mara could feel it like electricity in the air. "I've got 6 years of living here that says so," Elias said, his voice dropping into something dangerous. "I've got the only cabin for 20 miles, the only working trap lines, the only claim that matters. You want to dispute that, we can settle it right now." Marcus's men shifted nervously. The younger one looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, but Marcus just smiled. "No need for that kind of talk. We're all civilized men here." "Are we?" "I think so." Marcus gestured to his companions. "These are business associates. We're here to do legitimate surveying work. If there's nothing to find, we'll find nothing and move on." "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. "No." "No?" "You've got until dawn tomorrow, then you leave." Marcus's smile faded. That's not very neighborly. We're not neighbors. You're trespassers. The only reason I haven't shot you already is professional courtesy. That courtesy ends at sunrise. The younger man, Mara thought she heard Marcus call him Davis, spoke up nervously. Marcus, maybe we should just... Quiet. Marcus kept his eyes on Elias. You're making a big mistake, Vaughn. We're not your enemy, but we could be. You already are. You just don't know it yet. For a long moment, nobody moved. Mara's hand was slick with sweat inside her glove, gripping the rifle so hard her fingers ached. Then Marcus laughed, breaking the tension. All right. We'll respect your territory. Dawn tomorrow, we're gone. He paused. But you should know, we're not the only ones coming. Word's out. Men are heading this way from 3 different territories. Some of them won't be as reasonable as we are. Let them come. There's going to be trouble, Vaughn. Real trouble. You and your woman might want to think about clearing out before it arrives. We'll take our chances. Marcus shrugged. Your funeral. Elias didn't respond. He just stood there, rifle ready, until Marcus and his men retreated to their camp. Then he backed toward the cabin, never taking his eyes off them, and pushed Mara inside. The moment the door closed, he barred it and moved to the window, watching. Are they going to leave? Mara asked. Maybe. Maybe not. He glanced at her. Either way, we need to be ready for them not to. He spent the next hour preparing, loading extra ammunition, positioning weapons around the cabin, checking sight lines and fields of fire. Mara watched, her back throbbing where the bear had clawed her, her mind racing with fear and adrenaline. Elias, she said finally, what if Marcus is right? What if more people come? They will. Then what? He turned to look at her, his face hard in the lamplight. Then we defend what's ours, or we lose it. Those are the only options. We could leave. Where? Back to a town where you're unwanted and I can't stand to be? Back to people who'll judge us and find us lacking? He shook his head. I didn't come to the mountains to hide, Mara. I came here because this is where I belong. And if other people want to take that from me, they're welcome to try. You're talking about killing people. I'm talking about surviving. If that means killing, then yes. Mara thought about the bear, about pulling the trigger, about the moment when survival overrode everything else. I understand, she said. Do you? Because once this starts, there's no going back. We defend this place or we lose everything. I said I understand. Elias studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded and went back to his preparations. That night, they didn't sleep. They took turns watching the camp, waiting to see if Marcus and his men would keep their word or if the night would bring violence. The fire outside burned low. The men's voices faded, but neither Elias nor Mara relaxed. Tell me about the bear, Elias said quietly, sometime around midnight. Mara described it, the charge, the terror, the moment when she'd fired without thinking. You did well, he said when she finished. You didn't freeze. That's what kills most people. Not the bear, the freezing. I was terrified. Fear's fine. Fear keeps you alert. It's panic that gets you killed. He looked at her. You panicked a little. Running was stupid, but you kept your head enough to shoot. That counts for something. It was high praise coming from him. The men tomorrow, Mara said. What if they don't leave? Then we make them leave. How? However we have to. Dawn came cold and gray. Marcus and his men broke camp with the efficiency of people who'd done it 100 times. They saddled their horses, loaded their pack animals, and started to ride out. But at the edge of the clearing, Marcus stopped and turned back. Vaughn, he called. One more thing. Elias stepped out of the cabin, rifle in hand. Marcus gestured to the mountains. You ever hear of a man named Cyrus Hale? No. You will. He's the one spreading the silver story. Rich man, connected. He's convinced there's a fortune up here, and he's already sold shares in a mining operation that doesn't exist yet. Marcus smiled coldly. Men like that don't take no for an answer. When he comes, and he will come, you're going to wish you'd left when you had the chance. I'll take my chances. We'll see. Marcus tipped his hat mockingly. Good luck, Vaughn. You're going to need it. Then he and his men rode away, disappearing into the trees. Mara came to stand beside Elias, watching them go. Do you think they'll come back? She asked. Maybe not them, but others will. How many? As many as it takes to either find what they're looking for or give up looking. He turned toward the cabin. We need to prepare. Real preparation this time. Not just for winter, for war. Mara's stomach twisted, but she followed him inside, ready to do whatever it took. Because this was her home now, her life, her choice. And she'd be damned if she'd let anyone take it from her without a fight. The preparation started immediately. Elias spent the morning reinforcing the cabin windows with heavy shutters he'd made years ago but never installed. Mara helped him lift the thick planks into place, drilling holes, setting hinges that screamed with rust but held. These will stop most rifle fire, Elias said, testing the swing of one shutter. Won't stop everything, but it'll give us time. Time for what? To shoot back. He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather. Mara's hands shook as she held the next shutter in place. By afternoon, they'd turned the cabin into something that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Gun ports cut into the shutters, extra ammunition stored in accessible locations, water barrels filled and positioned away from the walls in case of fire. We need more supplies, Elias said, studying their remaining food stores with a critical eye. We get trapped here for any length of time, we'll starve before they can force us out. There's still game in the forest. Not enough. And I can't hunt if I'm defending the cabin. He grabbed his rifle. I'm going to Miller's Creek, 2 days there, 2 days back. Maybe I can pick up information while I'm there. You're leaving me alone? You'll be fine. Marcus won't come back this soon. He loaded his saddlebags with pelts for trading. You know how to use the rifle. You've proven that. Anyone comes while I'm gone, you stay inside and don't engage. Understand? Mara wanted to argue. Wanted to say she wasn't ready to be left alone, but the practical part of her brain, the part that had been growing stronger every day since she arrived, knew he was right. I understand. Good. He paused at the door. There's something else. The bear you shot. We need to process it before scavengers get to it. Meat, hide, fat. We can't waste it. Mara's stomach turned. You want me to do that alone? I want you to do what needs doing. Same as always. His eyes softened slightly. You can do this, Mara. You're stronger than you think. Then he was gone, the sound of his horse fading into the forest. Mara stood in the doorway, watching until she couldn't see him anymore. Then she closed the door, barred it, and tried to ignore the sudden weight of silence. She lasted an hour before the isolation started pressing in. The cabin felt too quiet, too empty. Every creak of wood settling made her jump. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps. Stop it, she told herself. You're being ridiculous. But knowing she was being ridiculous didn't make the fear go away. To distract herself, she grabbed the skinning knife and headed toward where the bear had died. The carcass was still there, frozen solid, half buried in snow. Scavengers had already been at it, crows and what looked like coyote tracks circling the area. But most of the meat remained intact. Mara stared at the massive body, trying to remember everything Elias had taught her about field dressing. Start with the hide. Cut carefully. Don't puncture the organs. She made the first incision and immediately knew she was doing it wrong. The knife dragged instead of slicing clean. The hide resisted. She tried again, adjusting her angle, using more pressure. Blood stained the snow, her hands cramped from the cold and the awkward grip. The smell hit her. Musky, wild, mixed with the copper tang of blood. It took her 4 hours to skin the bear. 4 hours of cutting and pulling and swearing. 4 hours of making mistakes and correcting them. 4 hours of her back screaming from the claw wounds that hadn't fully healed. But when she was done, she had the hide. The meat took longer. Her butchering was clumsy, wasteful. She ruined good cuts, left too much on the bone, struggled to separate joints. But she kept working as the daylight faded until she had enough meat loaded into a makeshift sled to haul back to the cabin. By the time she finished, it was full dark and she was covered in blood and bear fat. She dragged the sled back to the cabin, her legs shaking with exhaustion. Inside, she hung the meat in the cold room Elias had dug into the hillside behind the cabin. Then she heated water and tried to scrub the worst of the blood off her skin and clothes. She fell into bed without eating, too tired to care about food. That night, she dreamed of the bear charging, of Marcus Webb's cold smile, of standing alone while men with rifles surrounded the cabin. She woke gasping, her heart hammering. The cabin was still dark, still silent, still empty. Mara lay there, staring at the ceiling, and wondered if Elias had been wrong about her strength. The next day brought fresh snow and bitter wind. Mara forced herself through the routines Elias had established: feed the horses, check the traps, split wood, maintain the fire. Every task felt harder without him there. Not because she couldn't do them, but because there was no one to confirm she was doing them right. She caught 2 rabbits in the snares, skinned them herself, the work going faster this time. Made a stew that was better than her previous attempts, but still nothing like Elias's. She ate alone, the silence oppressive. That night, as she sat by the fire trying to mend a torn shirt, she heard horses. Mara's blood went cold. She grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering through a gap in the shutters. 3 riders approached through the snow. Different men this time. Rougher looking. One was huge, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like a bull. Another was thin and wiry, with quick, nervous movements. The third looked ordinary except for the way he carried himself, coiled, dangerous, like a snake ready to strike. They stopped in front of the cabin. "Anyone home?" the big one called out. His voice was thick, uneducated. "We're looking for shelter. Got turned around in the snow." Mara didn't answer. "Come on now. We know someone's here." Saw smoke from the chimney. He dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with heavy thuds. "We're not asking for much. Just a place to get warm." The thin one stayed mounted, his eyes scanning the cabin with unsettling intensity. "Maybe they're not friendly, Dutch." "Everyone's friendly when you ask nice." Dutch walked toward the door. "What do you say? Let us in before we freeze?" Mara pressed herself against the wall beside the window, the rifle tight in her hands. Her mind raced. 3 men. 3 armed men, and she was alone. "The owner's not here," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to move on." "Owner's not here?" Dutch sounded amused. "That mean you're all by yourself?" Silence. "That's not very safe," Dutch continued. "Pretty woman alone in the wilderness, all sorts of things could happen." The thin one laughed, high and unpleasant. Mara's finger moved to the trigger. "I'm armed, and I will shoot if you try to come inside." "Now why would you want to do that? We're just cold, tired travelers looking for basic hospitality." "Find it somewhere else." Dutch's voice hardened. "That's not very Christian of you." "Don't care." The ordinary-looking one spoke for the first time, his voice soft but carrying clearly. "Dutch, let it go. We've got camp supplies." "But she's alone, Ray. Wouldn't be right to leave a woman unprotected." "She doesn't want our protection. Move on." There was tension in the exchange. Ray clearly had authority, despite Dutch being twice his size. Dutch stared at the cabin for a long moment. Then he spat in the snow. "Fine. But you're making a mistake, lady. These mountains aren't safe." "I'll manage." They mounted up and rode away, but slowly, taking their time, making it clear they were leaving by choice, not because they were forced to. Mara stayed at the window until they disappeared into the trees. Then she stayed there another hour, watching, waiting to see if they'd circle back. They didn't. But she didn't sleep that night either. Elias returned late the following afternoon, his horse laden with supplies. Mara nearly cried with relief when she saw him ride into the clearing. He took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him about the men, about Dutch and Ray and the thin one, about the veiled threats and the way they'd lingered. Elias's expression went dark. "You did right. Don't ever let strangers inside when you're alone." He started unloading supplies. "It's worse than I thought. Miller's Creek is full of men heading into the mountains. The silver stories spread everywhere. Some bastard named Cyrus Hale is selling shares in a mining operation he hasn't even started yet." Marcus mentioned him. "Hale's convinced there's a major deposit somewhere in this range. He's got maps, surveys, all kinds of official-looking documentation. None of it real, but people believe it anyway because they want to believe it." Elias carried a sack of flour inside. "He's promising investors 100-to-1 return. That's insane. That's greed. And greed makes people stupid." He set the flour down and turned to face her. "We need to talk about what happens when they come in force." "You think they will?" "I know they will. Hale's already sent out hired men to scout locations. They're going to search every canyon, every creek bed, every mountain slope looking for silver that doesn't exist. And when they get frustrated, they're going to start taking what they can get. Livestock, supplies, land. Mara sat down heavily at the table. So what do we do? We have two choices. We fight or we run. You already said you won't run. I won't. But you could. Elias met her eyes. I could get you back to Miller's Creek, give you enough money to start somewhere else, somewhere safe. The offer hung in the air between them. Mara thought about safety, about towns and people and a life that didn't involve rifles and bears and the constant threat of violence. Then she thought about standing in line in Cutter's Ridge, waiting to be chosen. Thought about Eleanor Price's laughter. Thought about being invisible, unwanted, slowly dying inside while pretending to be alive. No, she said. Mara, I said no. She stood up, meeting his gaze. You chose me when no one else would. Taught me how to survive. Gave me a place where I'm not too strong or too much or too wrong. I'm not giving that up because some greedy men decided they want what's ours. Something shifted in Elias's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. All right then, he said quietly. Then we prepare for war. They spent the next week fortifying everything they could. Elias showed Mara how to build deadfalls, hidden traps designed to maim or kill anyone who triggered them. They set up warning bells on the approach trails, cached weapons and ammunition in spots around the property in case they got cut off from the cabin. If we get separated, Elias said, showing her a rocky outcrop half a mile north, we meet here. You remember how to get there? Yes. And if I'm dead? The question was so blunt it took her breath away. Elias, if I'm dead, he repeated, you take the best horse, the emergency pack from the cold room, and you ride for Miller's Creek. Don't look back. Don't try to bury me. Don't try to be a hero. You just survive. Understand? Mara's throat tightened. I understand. Say it. If you're dead, I take the horse and the emergency pack, and I ride for Miller's Creek. Good. That night, as they lay in bed, Mara spoke into the darkness. Are you scared? Elias was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Yes, he finally said. It was the first time she'd ever heard him admit to fear. Me too, she whispered. His hand found hers under the blankets. Not romantic, not sexual, just contact. Acknowledgement. Two people facing something terrible and choosing not to face it alone. They fell asleep like that, hands clasped, preparing for whatever came next. The attack came 3 days later. Mara woke to the sound of horses and voices, not 3 or 4 this time, but many. She scrambled to the window and her stomach dropped. At least a dozen men surrounded the cabin, all armed, all mounted. At the center was a man she'd never seen before. Older, well-dressed, even in traveling clothes, sitting his horse like he owned everything he surveyed. Cyrus Hale. Beside her, Elias was already moving, checking weapons, positioning himself at the other window. Elias Vaughn. Hale's voice was cultured, educated, completely out of place in the wilderness. I'd like to speak with you. Just talk. No violence necessary. Elias didn't respond. I know you're in there, and I know you're armed, but I also know you're outnumbered. So let's be civilized about this, shall we? What do you want? Elias called back. Access, that's all. I have investors who've paid good money for the rights to survey and mine this territory. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm simply asking you to cooperate. This is my land. Do you have a deed? Don't need one. Squatters' rights. I've been here 6 years. Yes, but squatters' rights are complicated, aren't they? Especially in unincorporated territory. I have lawyers, Mr. Vaughn. Good lawyers. We can tie this up in courts for years. Or, Hale paused meaningfully. We can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone. Not interested. I'm offering you 10% of whatever we find. There's nothing to find. Then you've got nothing to lose, do you? Hale's voice hardened slightly. Look, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but I have investors expecting returns. I have workers expecting to be paid. I have obligations that supersede your desire to be left alone. One way or another, we're surveying this mountain. The question is whether you're going to be compensated for it, or whether you're going to be an obstacle that needs to be removed. Mara looked at Elias. His jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping. You threatening me? He asked. I'm explaining reality. You're one man. I have resources. Men, money, influence. You cannot win this. Watch me. Hale sighed, theatrical. Very well. I tried to be reasonable. He raised his voice. Mr. Vaughn, you have until sundown to vacate this property. After that, my men will remove you by whatever means necessary. Your men are welcome to try. Don't be a fool. You're outnumbered 12-1. 12-2, Mara called out before she could stop herself. There was a pause. Then Hale laughed, genuinely amused. You've got a woman in there? Even better, Mr. Vaughn, surely you don't want to put her in danger over something as pointless as pride. Elias looked at Mara. She saw the question in his eyes. Last chance to back out. She picked up her rifle. Guess we'll find out, Elias called back. Hale's amusement vanished. Sundown, Mr. Vaughn. After that, the consequences are on your head. He wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. But they didn't go far. Mara could see them setting up camp just at the edge of rifle range, making it clear they weren't leaving. Elias closed the shutters and turned to face her. Last chance, he said quietly. You can still go. No. They're going to attack. Tonight, probably. And they're not going to be gentle about it. I know. People are going to die, Mara. Maybe them. Maybe us. Probably both. I know. He studied her face, searching for doubt. Finding none, he nodded slowly. All right then. Let's make it cost them. They spent the remaining daylight checking every preparation, every weapon, every defensive position. Elias walked her through the plan, fields of fire, fallback positions, what to do if the cabin caught fire, if they got separated, if one of them went down. Don't try to be a hero, he said for the 10th time. You shoot, you move, you survive, that's all that matters. What about you? Same thing. He handed her a pistol to keep as backup. But if it comes down to it, if you have to choose between saving me or saving yourself, you choose yourself. Understand? Elias, understand. Mara took the pistol, its weight heavy and real in her hand. I understand. Sundown came cold and red. They ate a silent meal, neither of them hungry, but forcing food down anyway. They'd need the energy. As darkness fell, Elias extinguished all the lamps. They sat in the dark cabin, rifles ready, waiting. An hour passed. Then 2. Maybe they won't come, Mara whispered. They'll come. Another hour. Then, so faint Mara almost missed it, the sound of men moving through the trees. Elias heard it too. He moved to his position at the east window. Mara took the south. The attack, when it came, was sudden and brutal. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions simultaneously. Bullets slammed into the shutters, splintering wood, punching through in places. Mara dropped below the window line, her heart hammering. Return fire, Elias shouted. Don't let them get comfortable. Mara raised up and fired through the gun port, aiming at muzzle flashes in the darkness. She had no idea if she hit anything. Didn't matter, just had to make them keep their heads down. The shooting went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then it stopped, leaving ringing silence. They're testing us, Elias said, reloading. Seeing how we respond. Next time they'll come harder. He was right. The second assault came with fire. Torches arced through the air, landing on the roof against the walls. Mara heard the crackling as dry wood caught. The roof, she shouted. Keep shooting, Elias yelled back. We lose the walls, we lose everything. Mara fired at the shapes moving in the darkness, trying to keep them from getting close enough to throw more torches. Beside her, Elias did the same, his shots measured and precise. Smoke began to fill the cabin. The fire was spreading. We can't stay here much longer, Mara coughed. Not yet. Elias fired again, and someone out in the darkness screamed. We make them pay for every inch. A bullet punched through the shutter beside Mara's head, missing her by inches. She ducked, her ears ringing, and came back up firing. Then she heard Elias grunt. She turned. He was clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. Elias! I'm fine. Keep shooting. But he wasn't fine. She could see him struggling to work the rifle with one arm. The cabin was filling with smoke. The fire was spreading across the roof. They had minutes at best before the whole structure came down. Mara made a decision. We're leaving, she said. No. Yes, now, before we burn alive. She grabbed the emergency pack from where they'd stashed it. East side. We go through the window and run for the outcrop. They'll see us. Better than dying in here. Elias looked at the spreading flames, at his wounded shoulder, at Mara's determined face. All right, he said finally. On three. They positioned themselves at the east window, the one facing away from most of the attackers. 1, Elias counted. Mara took a breath, rifle gripped tight. 2. She could hear men shouting outside, smell smoke and gunpowder and fear. 3. Elias kicked open the shutter and they went through, dropping into the snow and running. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets kicked up snow. Mara ran harder than she'd ever run in her life, her lungs burning, her legs pumping. Beside her, Elias stumbled. She grabbed his good arm and pulled him forward, half dragging him toward the tree line. They made it into the forest as the cabin's roof collapsed behind them with a roar of flame and sparks. Mara didn't look back. She just kept running, Elias's weight heavy against her side, the sound of pursuit growing closer behind them. They'd lost the cabin. But they were alive, and the fight was far from over. They made it 200 yards before Elias collapsed. Mara caught him as he went down, his weight nearly taking her with him. Blood soaked through his shirt, black in the moonlight. His face was gray. Can't, he gasped. Go on without me. Shut up. Mara dragged him behind a fallen log, breathing hard. Behind them, she could hear voices, see torchlight flickering through the trees. We're not doing this. Mara, I said shut up. She pressed her hand against his shoulder wound. He grunted in pain. How bad is it? Bad enough. She could feel blood pulsing against her palm. Too much blood. She ripped a strip from her shirt and tied it tight around his shoulder, making him hiss. We need to move, she said. Can you walk? Maybe. That's not an answer. The torches were getting closer, voices clearer. Over here, I saw something move. Elias struggled to his feet, using the log for support. The outcrop. We make it there. We've got cover. They stumbled forward through the snow, Mara supporting most of Elias's weight. Every step felt like it might be their last. The voices behind them grew louder, more excited. There, I see them. A gunshot cracked. The bullet hit a tree to their left, spraying bark. Mara fired back blindly over her shoulder, not aiming, just trying to slow them down. They crashed through underbrush, Elias's breathing ragged and wet. The outcrop was close now. She could see the dark mass of rock rising against the stars. Another 50 yards, 40, 30. Elias's legs gave out completely. He went down hard, taking Mara with him. Go, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I'm done. No, you're not. Mara grabbed him under the arms and dragged, pure desperation giving her strength she didn't know she had. 20 yards, 15. Gunfire erupted behind them. Bullets kicked up snow all around. 10 yards. Mara pulled Elias into the shelter of the rocks just as a bullet spanged off stone inches from her head. She positioned him against the rock face, then turned and fired at their pursuers. 3 men, maybe 4, spread out in the trees. Vaughn, one of them called out, give it up! You're bleeding out anyway. Mara fired again. The man ducked. Beside her, Elias was fumbling with his rifle, trying to reload one-handed. His movements were clumsy, unfocused. How many shots you got left? He asked. Mara checked. 4. Make them count. They held the position for what felt like hours. Every time one of Hale's men tried to advance, Mara or Elias would fire, driving them back. But their ammunition was running out, and Elias was getting weaker. We can't stay here, Mara said finally. They'll just wait us out. You got a better idea? She did, actually. It was insane and would probably get them both killed. But staying here would definitely get them killed. Miller's Creek, she said. We go to Miller's Creek and we tell everyone what Hale's doing. They won't believe us. Maybe not, but they'll believe their eyes when we show up bleeding and burned out. She reloaded her rifle. Hale's been selling this silver story, building it up. But if we expose it publicly, if we make enough noise that people start asking questions, he loses his investors. Elias stared at her. That's your plan? Talk? You got a better one? He was quiet, thinking. Then he laughed. Rough and pained, but real. No, I really don't. Can you ride? Probably not, but I'll try. They waited until the men in the trees seemed to settle in for a siege. Then they moved, not toward Miller's Creek, but back toward what was left of the cabin, circling wide through the forest. It took them over an hour to cover ground that should have taken 20 minutes. Elias had to stop every few yards to rest. His face was slick with sweat despite the cold. When they finally reached the stable area, Mara's heart sank. The stable was burned. The horses were gone. "Hale's men took them," Elias said, leaning heavily against a tree. "Of course they did." Mara wanted to scream, wanted to give up. They'd lost everything, the cabin, the supplies, the horses. Elias was bleeding out. They were surrounded by armed men who wanted them dead. Then she saw movement in the trees beyond the stable ruins. Her hand went to her rifle. A horse emerged from the shadows. Not one of theirs. This was a big sorrel gelding with expensive tack. And sitting on it, looking uncertain and terrified, was Thomas Brennan, the same Thomas they'd sent away weeks ago. He saw them and his eyes went wide. For a moment, Mara thought he'd run. Then he dismounted and led the horse over. "I heard the shooting," he said quietly. "Saw the flames. I was camped about a mile east and He trailed off, taking in Elias's condition. "You're hurt bad." "What are you doing here?" Mara asked. "You were supposed to go back." "I tried. Got turned around. Been surviving out here ever since." He looked ashamed. "Not very well." "The horse," Elias said, his voice weak. "Where'd you get it?" "Stole it from Hale's camp 2 days ago. Figured if I was going to die out here anyway, might as well go down doing something right." He held out the reins. "Take it. You need it more than I do." Mara stared at him. This boy who'd come chasing silver, who'd been so entitled and unprepared, who they'd sent away to fend for himself. "Come with us," she heard herself say. Thomas blinked. "What?" "Miller's Creek. We're going to expose Hale. You want to help?" Yes, I do." Between them, they got Elias into the saddle. He slumped forward, barely conscious, but held on. Mara mounted behind him, keeping him upright. Thomas walked alongside. They moved through the forest slowly, avoiding the main trails, using routes Elias had shown Mara during their months together. Every mile felt impossible. Twice Elias nearly fell. Once they heard riders and had to hide, pressed against the frozen ground, barely breathing while Hale's men passed within 20 yards. Dawn found them still miles from Miller's Creek, exhausted and desperate. "We're not going to make it," Thomas said, looking at Elias's pallid face. "He needs a doctor now." "There's a trapper's cabin," Elias murmured, barely conscious. "Half-mile north. Old Peterson's place. He died 2 winters back, but the cabin should still be standing." They found it just as Elias passed out completely. The cabin was rough, one room, barely weatherproof, but it had walls and a roof. Mara and Thomas got Elias inside and laid him on the floor. "We need to stop the bleeding," Mara said, stripping away Elias's shirt to expose the wound. It was worse than she'd thought. The bullet had gone clean through, but the exit wound was ragged and infected. "I don't know how to do this," Thomas said, his voice shaking. "Neither do I." Mara built a fire, heated water, found clean cloth in the emergency pack. "But we're going to figure it out." She cleaned the wound as best she could, packed it with cloth, and bound it tight. Elias didn't wake during any of it, which scared her more than anything. "What now?" Thomas asked. "Now you go to Miller's Creek, find the marshal, tell him what happened." "What about you?" "I stay with him." Mara touched Elias's forehead. He was burning with fever. "He's not going to make it unless that fever breaks. Someone needs to be here." "But if Hale's men find you, then I'll deal with it." She picked up her rifle. "You wanted to help. This is how. Go fast. Bring help. Don't get caught." Thomas looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, grabbed the horse, and rode. Mara was alone with Elias and the silence. She spent the next day fighting for his life. The fever got worse before it got better. Elias thrashed and muttered, trapped in nightmares Mara couldn't reach. She cooled him with snow, forced water between his lips, changed the bandages when they soaked through with blood and pus. At one point he woke, his eyes unfocused. "Sarah?" he whispered. "It's Mara." "Sarah, I'm sorry. I tried to save you. Elias, it's Mara. You're safe." But he was already gone again, lost in fever dreams. Mara had never heard him mention Sarah before. Didn't know who she was. But the pain in his voice when he said the name told her everything she needed to know. Everyone had losses. Everyone had scars, even men like Elias, who seemed too hard to break. The second night was worse. Elias's breathing turned shallow and rapid. His skin was like paper. Mara sat beside him, holding his hand, and prepared herself for the possibility that he might not survive. "You don't get to die," she told him, her voice fierce. "You hear me? You pulled me out of that town when everyone else looked past me. You taught me how to be strong. You don't get to leave now." He didn't respond. Mara laid her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, and for the first time since she'd left Cutter's Ridge, she cried. Not pretty silent tears, ugly, desperate sobs that tore out of her chest like they'd been trapped there for years. She cried for the woman she'd been, overlooked, unwanted, slowly disappearing. She cried for the home they'd lost, the life they'd been building. She cried for Elias, who'd seen worth in her when no one else could. And she cried for herself because she'd finally found a place where she belonged and the world was trying to take it from her again. When the tears finally stopped, she was empty, wrung out, but also somehow lighter. She wiped her face, checked Elias's bandages, and added wood to the fire. Then she heard horses. Multiple horses. Coming fast. Mara grabbed her rifle and positioned herself at the window. If this was Hale's men, she'd take as many with her as she could. But the riders who emerged from the trees weren't Hale's men. It was the marshal from Miller's Creek, along with Thomas and at least 20 armed townspeople. Mara nearly collapsed with relief. The marshal, a grizzled man named Coleman, who looked like he'd seen everything and believed nothing, dismounted and approached carefully. "You Mara Kellen?" "Yes." "The boy says Cyrus Hale burned you out, shot your man. That true?" "Every word." Coleman studied her face. "Hale's claiming you and Vaughn attacked his survey team unprovoked. Says he was defending his men. He's lying." "I figured, but lying's not illegal. Burning people out of their homes is," he gestured to his men. "We're here to bring Hale in. Get some answers. Think you can ride?" "I can, but Elias needs a doctor." "Brought one." Coleman waved forward a thin man carrying a medical bag. "Doc Harris. He'll do what he can." The doctor went inside. Mara followed, watching as he examined Elias with professional efficiency. "Infection's bad," Harris said, "but he's young and strong. I've seen worse survive." He pulled out instruments. "This is going to hurt him. You might want to step outside." "I'm staying." The surgery took an hour. The doctor cut away infected tissue, cleaned the wound properly, and stitched it closed. Elias woke screaming halfway through and had to be held down by 3 men. But when it was over, his fever had already started to drop. "He'll make it," Harris said, washing his hands. "With rest and care." Mara sagged against the wall, exhausted beyond words. Coleman came to stand beside her. "You up for one more fight?" "What kind of fight?" "The talking kind. We're riding to Hale's camp. I want you there when I question him. Want him to see what he did." Mara looked at Elias, sleeping peacefully now under the doctor's care. "Let me say goodbye first." She knelt beside him, touching his face gently. "I'll be back soon. Don't you dare die while I'm gone." His eyes flickered open, clearer than they'd been in days. "Mara." "I'm here." "The cabin. Burned. It's gone." Something crossed his face. Pain, loss, then determination. "We'll rebuild." "You need to rest first." "We'll rebuild," he repeated, his hand finding hers. "Stronger this time." Mara squeezed his hand. "Yes, we will." Then she stood, picked up her rifle, and followed Coleman out. They rode to Hale's camp in force, 20 armed men, the marshal, and one woman who'd lost everything but refused to lose herself. Hale was there supervising the dismantling of equipment. He saw them coming and his face went carefully neutral. "Marshal Coleman, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cyrus Hale, I'm arresting you for arson, attempted murder, and fraud." Hale laughed. "On what evidence? The word of squatters who attacked my men? On the word of 20 witnesses who saw the smoke? On the word of Thomas Brennan, who you hired and who's willing to testify about the false surveys? And on the word of this woman, who you tried to kill for the crime of living on land you wanted?" Hale's eyes flickered to Mara. "I offered them compensation. They refused. What was I supposed to do?" "Not burn them out," Coleman said flatly. "Not shoot them. Not destroy their property." "I have investors. They have rights. Rights to what? Silver that doesn't exist? Mara stepped forward, her voice carrying. You sold people a fantasy, made them give you their money for mining rights to deposits that were never there. And when me and Elias were in your way, you decided to remove us. That's a lie. Is it? Then show us the survey reports, the geological studies, the actual evidence of silver. Hale's jaw tightened. Those documents are proprietary. They're fake, Thomas called out from the crowd. I helped draft them, made them up based on what Hale told us to write. There was never any silver. The crowd erupted. Men who'd invested their savings, who'd come to these mountains chasing Hale's promises, started shouting. You said there was a fortune here. I spent everything I had. You lying bastard. Coleman raised his hand for silence. That's for the courts to decide. But here's what I know. The territorial government's been looking into land fraud schemes. They've got investigators coming through next month. Every claim, every survey, every mineral right is going to be examined. He looked at Hale. So you've got a choice. Come peaceful and maybe you can cut a deal. Or resist and we'll drag you. Hale looked at the crowd, at Coleman's hard face, at Mara standing there covered in soot and blood but unbroken. He chose peace. They took him away in chains, along with 3 of his men who'd been part of the attack. The rest scattered, including Dutch and Ray, disappearing into the mountains before they could be arrested. Thomas approached Mara as the crowd dispersed. I'm sorry, he said, for being useless before, for believing the silver story, for everything. Mara looked at him, this boy who'd learned hard lessons and somehow survived them. You came back when it mattered. That's what counts. What will you do now? Rebuild. She said it with certainty she didn't quite feel yet. And you? Go home, I think. Tell my father I was an idiot and try to find a real job. He smiled weakly. Maybe learn to be less useless. You weren't useless today. Thanks for lying. He mounted his borrowed horse. If you ever need anything, we'll manage. But thank you. He rode away, one more person changed by the mountains. Mara returned to the trapper's cabin. Elias was awake, sitting up with difficulty, talking to Doc Harris. You're supposed to be resting, Mara said. Got tired of lying down. He looked at her. Hale? Arrested, along with some of his men. The rest ran. Elias absorbed this. And the silver story? Dead. Coleman spreading the word. The territorial investigators will finish it. For the first time since the attack, Elias smiled. It was small and exhausted, but real. You did it. You actually did it. We did it. Mara sat beside him. Both of us. They stayed at the trapper's cabin for 2 weeks while Elias healed. Doc Harris visited every few days, checking the wound, bringing supplies. Coleman stopped by once to update them on Hale's prosecution. Things were looking good for a conviction. Thomas came by too before he left for the east. He brought them food and firewood and an apology that was better than his first one. I was wrong, he said simply. About everything. About what matters. About what strength looks like. He looked at Mara. You're the strongest person I've ever met. And I'm sorry it took me so long to see it. Mara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and accepted it. When Elias was strong enough to travel, they went back to their mountain. The cabin was gone. Nothing left but charred timber and ash. The stable was destroyed. The cold room had caved in. Everything they'd built was ruined. Mara stood looking at the wreckage and felt the weight of it. We can't rebuild this alone, she said quietly. Not before winter comes back. No, Elias agreed. We can't. So what do we do? He was quiet for a long time, looking at the ruins of their home. Then he said something Mara never expected to hear from him. We ask for help. Over the next 2 months, they learned something neither of them had quite believed before. People could surprise you. Thomas sent money from Philadelphia. Not a lot, but enough for lumber and supplies. Coleman and some of the Miller's Creek men came up twice, bringing materials and labor. They didn't stay long. Most of them didn't have Elias's tolerance for isolation, but they worked hard while they were there. Even some of Hale's former workers, men who'd been duped by the silver story and felt guilty about the attack, showed up offering help by way of apology. Elias accepted it all with the same gruff efficiency he brought to everything. But Mara saw the way he looked at these people sometimes, like he was relearning something he'd forgotten, that not everyone would hurt you if you let them close. The new cabin rose slowly, stronger than the first, better designed. With help from people who knew construction, they built something that would last. And somewhere in the process of rebuilding, something shifted between Mara and Elias. It wasn't sudden, wasn't dramatic, just a gradual awareness that what they had was more than partnership, more than survival. One night, as they sat by the fire in the half-finished cabin, Elias spoke. "Sarah was my sister." Mara looked at him, surprised. He never talked about his past. "She died when I was 17. Fever. I was supposed to be watching her while my parents were away." His voice was quiet, distant. "I fell asleep. When I woke up, she was burning up. By the time I got help, it was too late." "Elias, my parents never forgave me. I never forgave myself. That's why I came to the mountains, to be somewhere where I couldn't fail anyone else." Mara reached out and took his hand. "You haven't failed me. Haven't I? I almost got you killed. You kept me alive, taught me to be strong, gave me a place where I could be myself without apology." She squeezed his hand. "That's not failure." He looked at her then, really looked, and Mara saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Vulnerability, hope, maybe even love. "When I saw you in that plaza," he said slowly, "standing there while everyone else walked past, I saw myself. Someone the world decided wasn't worth the trouble. And I thought, here's someone who understands what it means to be too much and not enough all at once. Is that why you chose me? At first. But then I got to know you, saw how hard you worked, how you didn't quit even when everything hurt, how you became exactly what you needed to be instead of what everyone said you should be." He paused. "And I realized I didn't just choose you because you were like me. I chose you because you were better than me." Mara felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not—" "You are. You're stronger and braver and better than you know. And I—" He stopped, struggling with words. "I don't know how to say this right. Just say it. I love you." The words came out rough, unpracticed. "Not because you're useful or strong or capable, but because you're you, and that's enough, more than enough." Mara's breath caught. No one had ever said those words to her before. Not her father, not anyone. "I love you too," she whispered, "and I choose you. Not because I have to, because I want to." They sat there in the half-built cabin, holding hands, and for the first time in both their lives, they felt like they'd finally come home. The cabin was finished by late autumn. It was better than the first, stronger walls, better insulation, a second room that could serve as storage or, someday, maybe something else. They stocked it carefully with supplies earned from pelts and with money. Thomas continued to send periodically, along with letters about his new job as a surveyor for a railroad company. "Honest work," he wrote. "Hard work. The kind that actually means something." Mara and Elias settled into a new rhythm, still working hard, still preparing for winter, but with something added now, moments of softness in the middle of the survival, a touch that wasn't purely functional, a laugh that came easier, small kindnesses that meant everything. The first real snow came in late November. They were ready this time. Food, fuel, supplies, everything they needed to survive whatever the mountain threw at them. That night, lying in bed with the wind howling outside, Mara spoke into the darkness. "Do you ever regret it, choosing me instead of someone easier?" "Every day," Elias said. Mara's heart clenched. Then he continued, "I regret that I didn't find you sooner, regret that you had to stand in that plaza being overlooked by idiots who couldn't see what was right in front of them. Regret every hard thing that happened before you got here." He rolled over to face her. "But choosing you, bringing you here, that's the only thing I've done in my life that I don't regret at all." Mara kissed him then, slow and sure, and felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home. Not the cabin, not the mountain, but this. Two people who'd been broken by the world finding each other and choosing not to break again. Winter was brutal that year, worse than the one before. The snow piled higher than the windows. The cold dropped so low that water froze in minutes. Food ran short twice, forcing them to ration carefully. But they survived. together. In early spring, as the snow began to melt, they made a trip down to Miller's Creek. The town had changed. Hale's trial had brought attention to the region. Real prospectors had come, found copper deposits in the northern ranges. Nothing as dramatic as silver, but enough to bring steady work. The town was growing, new buildings, new people, new opportunities. Coleman found them at the general store. "Heard you two made it through," he said. "Wasn't sure you would." "Takes more than winter to kill us," Elias replied. Apparently, Coleman studied them. Mara's weathered face and capable hands, Elias's healing shoulder and easier demeanor. "You two look different." "How so?" "Happy." Coleman said it like he was surprised. "Didn't think that was possible up in those mountains." Mara smiled. "Possible for the right people." They bought supplies and headed back up the mountain, back to the cabin, back to the life they'd built from nothing. Years passed. The story of what happened with Hale spread. Some told it accurately. Others embellished. A few turned it into legend, the mountain man and his fierce wife who'd fought off an army and won. Mara and Elias didn't care about the stories. They just lived. They expanded the cabin, added a small barn, built a real chicken coop, each year making their home a little stronger, a little more permanent. Some winters were easier, some were harder. They fought sometimes. Two strong people with different ideas didn't always agree. But they fought fair and they fought together, never letting anger turn into something that could break what they'd built. 3 years after the attack, Mara found herself pregnant. It terrified her. The mountain had never been kind to children. The isolation, the danger, the sheer difficulty of raising a child in a place that killed the weak. "We can go to town," Elias offered when she told him. "Stay there until after the baby comes." But Mara looked around their home, the walls they'd built together, the life they'd carved from wilderness, and shook her head. "No, this is where we belong, all of us." Their daughter was born in early winter, with Doc Harris making the dangerous journey up the mountain to help. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, already fighting. They named her Sarah. Elias held his daughter with shaking hands, tears running down his scarred face. "I couldn't save my sister," he said quietly, "but I'll keep this one safe, I promise." And he did. Sarah grew up wild and strong, learning to ride before she could write, to shoot before she could read. She grew up hearing the story of how her mother stood in a plaza unwanted and unchosen, and how her father saw worth where others saw nothing. She grew up understanding that strength came in many forms, that being different wasn't being broken, that the world would try to tell you what you should be, but you got to choose what you actually became. When Sarah was 5, Thomas visited with his new wife, a practical woman named Helen, who took one look at the mountain and said, "It's beautiful, and I never want to live here." They all laughed, sitting around the table while Sarah showed off her collection of interesting rocks and feathers. "You did it," Thomas said to Mara during a quiet moment. "Built the life you wanted." "We did it," Mara corrected. "All of us. You included. I just brought a horse. You brought more than that. You showed up when it mattered. That counts." Years continued to pass. The world changed around them. The railroad came closer. Towns grew larger. The wilderness shrank bit by bit. But the mountain remained, and so did Mara and Elias. They grew older together. Gray hair, aching joints, the accumulated scars of a life lived hard. But they never grew apart. On Mara's 50th birthday, they sat on the porch of their cabin, expanded now to accommodate visiting grandchildren, though Sarah had sworn she'd never move to the mountains permanently, and watched the sun set over the peaks. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd chosen different that day?" Mara asked. "Picked one of the other women?" Elias considered it. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we built, and I can't imagine it any other way." He took her hand, still rough and scarred after all these years. "You were never too much, Mara. Everyone else was just too little to handle you." Mara laughed. "That's the worst compliment I've ever heard." "Good thing I'm not trying to compliment you then. Just stating facts." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching their mountain settle into night. The world had tried to break them both, had told them they were wrong, unwanted, not enough. But they'd refused to believe it. They'd chosen each other, chosen strength over surrender, chosen to build something real in a place that destroyed the unprepared. And in doing so, they'd become exactly what they needed to be. Not perfect, never perfect, but unbreakable. The mountain hadn't given them anything. It couldn't. The mountain was just rock and tree and indifferent sky. What Mara and Elias had, the home, the life, the love, they'd earned it themselves. Took it with bleeding hands and exhausted bodies and stubborn refusal to quit. And they never gave it back. As the stars came out overhead, Mara rested her head on Elias's shoulder and thought about the woman she'd been, standing in that dusty plaza, waiting to be chosen, expecting nothing. That woman was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who'd learned that being chosen mattered less than choosing yourself. That worth wasn't granted by others. It was proven by what you survived and how you survived it. She'd been told she was too strong for love. Turned out she was just strong enough for the right kind, the kind that wasn't soft or easy, the kind forged in fire and snow and the absolute refusal to break. "I'd choose you again," Mara said quietly. "Every time." Elias squeezed her hand. Same. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.